When you set up a new phone or new computer, one of the first things you'll be asked to do is choose your language and region. Now, most people will instinctively choose their own language and region. For example, you might be tempted to choose English, United Kingdom. But the next time you're asked to choose, try choosing a different system. For example, try choosing Chinese Simplified, PRC, and you'll see a difference right away in terms of the date format, in terms of the order of elements. In English UK, you'll see day, month, year, in that order, whereas if you switch to Chinese Simplified PRC, you'll get year first, and then the month, and then the day. This highlights a major difference in how the English and Chinese languages view the world. Before we dive in though, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. In English, as with most Western European languages, the approach is one where you start small and eventually zoom out. You zoom out from within. So for example, 25th December 2026. You start with the smallest element, which is the day, 25th, and then you zoom out to the month, December, and then you zoom out to the year, 2026, in that particular order. In Chinese and in most East Asian languages, you do the exact opposite. You start big and go small. You zoom in from without. So for that same date, you start with a year. You start with 20年, and then you zoom into the month, which is 12月, and then you zoom into the day, which is 25日. So in Chinese, you would say 2026年12月25日 in that order. In Chinese, you would never say 25日12月2026年. It has to be in the opposite order of what you get in British English. Now, this applies not only to dates, but to all references to time. For example, AM and PM. Whereas in English, you would say 9:25 AM or 4:30 PM. In Chinese, AM and PM would be the larger unit, larger than the hour, so you would say 上午9点25 or 下午4点30, the AM PM first, and then the hour. This applies also to the seasons. For example, when talking about semesters in English, we might say fall 2027 or spring 2028. We begin with the season first and then the year. In Chinese, it's the opposite because the year is the bigger unit. So you would say 2027年秋季 or 2028年春季, the year first and then the season. This applies also to centuries. So in English, you might say mid-20th century or late 19th century. In Chinese, century is the larger unit, so you would say 20世纪中期 or 19世纪末期. Okay, century first, and then the part of the century. Whole before part. Now, there is a reason why things are ordered this way in Chinese, and that reason is the iconicity of scope. In the scholarly literature, it is also known as the whole before part principle, or the general preceding particular principle. Now, this is a principle that applies not only to time, but to all manner of information organization. In an earlier video, we talked about how names are ordered in Chinese. The family name comes first, and then the given name. So for example, Yao Ming, Yao is the family name, Ming is the given name. Okay, names appear in this order, family name and then given name. This is an application of the whole before part principle. Okay, family is the larger unit, and then the individual is part of that family, so it appears second. Now, another application of this whole before part principle is the organization of space, as exemplified in the description of addresses. When you give an address in Chinese, you also zoom in from without. You also start with larger elements and move successively towards smaller units. Let me illustrate this with an example of an address, first in English and then in Chinese. In English, a typical address might look like this: 800 Washington Street, San Francisco, California, USA. So you start with the house number 800, and then you go to the street, Washington Street. The street is bigger than the house, obviously. And then you go to the next big unit, which is the city, San Francisco, and the next big unit, the state, California, and finally, the country, which is the largest. Okay, so house number, street, city, state, and then country in that order. If you were to give the same address in Chinese, you would have to reverse that entire order. You begin with the country, and then go to the state, and then go to the city, and then the street, and then the house number. So that same address given in Chinese would be 美国加州三藩市华盛顿街800号. Okay, the country is 美国, the state is 加州, the city 三藩市, the street 华盛顿街, and finally the house number 800号. Okay, notice how in Chinese you have to give that 号. You can't just say 800. You can't say 800 Washington Street. You have to say number 800 Washington Street. And that word number is the 号 that you put after the actual number. Now let me sidetrack a little bit and talk about the Chinese translation for the city San Francisco. The name that I used in this address is Sanfanshi, which is one of the two names in Chinese for the city of San Francisco. Sanfanshi is the name used by earlier Cantonese-speaking immigrants to the city, and Sanfanshi itself is a hybrid loan. So the first part, Sanfan, is a phonological translation of San Fran, and then the last part, Shi, is a phonosemantic hybrid. Shi obviously means city, but it also matches phonologically to Cisco. So there you have it, Sanfanshi for San Francisco, used by earlier Cantonese immigrants. Whereas later Mandarin-speaking immigrants from Taiwan and mainland China use a different name. They use the name Jiujingshan, which translates to Old Gold Mountain, which refers to the gold rush of 1849. So you see these two names, Sanfanshi and Jiujingshan, competing with each other locally. In two of the largest Chinese language newspapers here, in the Hong Kong-based Xingdao Daily, Xingdao Zhibao, which caters mainly to a Cantonese-speaking audience, local news falls under the banner Sanfanshi. Whereas in the Taiwan-based World Journal, 世界日报, which serves mainly a Mandarin-speaking population, you will find local news under the banner Jiujingshan. But getting back to our main point, the point that I wanted to make here is that in English, addresses go from the smallest element eventually to the largest, and in Chinese it's the opposite. You start with the largest elements and eventually shrink down to the smallest. Let me give you another example. So the residence of the British Prime Minister in English would be 10 Downing Street, London, United Kingdom. In Chinese, you would get that same address in the reverse order, so you would begin with 英国, and then 伦敦, and then 唐宁街, and then 10号. So country, city, street, and number in Chinese. In addition to whether you're zooming in or zooming out when describing the elements of an address, there are other differences between English and Chinese addresses. If you look at this map of San Francisco here, you see Mission Street, which is one of the bigger streets in San Francisco. And then off of Mission Street here, you see another smaller street called Mint Street. And then off of Mint Street, you have another yet smaller street called Jesse Street. So in San Francisco, each street, however big or small, has its own name. Okay, that seems to be the convention in English. Whereas if you look at this map of Taipei here, you see this main street called Nanjing Donglu, Nanjing East Road, 四段, section 4. So the first thing that you'll notice is that this major road here, Nanjing Road, is divided into an eastern section and a western section. There is a Nanjing Donglu and a Nanjing Xilu. Okay, now this division of streets into east and west, or north and south, isn't entirely uncommon in the West. For example, in the city of Chicago, Grand Avenue is divided into East Grand Avenue and West Grand Avenue. Michigan Avenue is divided into North Michigan Avenue and South Michigan Avenue. So you get that here too. But this is a fairly common practice in many Chinese cities. In addition to that east-west division, you'll also see that the street itself is divided into different sections. There's section 1, section 2, section 3, section 4. So Nanjing Donglu has 一段, 二段, 三段, and 四段, etc. This is something that is less common. With the bigger streets, there's a north-south, east-west division, and then within each division, there is a division into different sections. Now, let's take a look at this little street that branches off from Nanjingdonglu, 四段. Okay, you'll see that it doesn't have its own name, but instead it's referred to as a lane, a 巷. So this is referred to as 南京东路四段53巷. It is a lane, 53巷, of 南京东路四段. And then if you look at this even smaller street that branches off from 53巷, you will see that this is referred to as an alley, 弄, 五弄. Okay, so this tiny street here is referred to as 南京东路四段53巷五弄. Okay, so the way in which things are coded here is smaller streets are treated as subsections of larger streets, and then these smaller streets themselves have even smaller subsections. Instead of giving each street its own name, everything is seen as a subsection of something else. And because of that, addresses tend to be a lot longer in Chinese than in English. So for example, a typical address in English, as we looked at earlier, would be 800 Washington Street, San Francisco, California, USA. For the street address part, 800 Washington Street is all you have. In a typical address in Taipei, however, you might see something like this. 4th floor, number 9, alley 5, lane 53, Nanjing East Road, section 4. Okay, you have all these little subsections so that the entire street address becomes 南京东路四段53巷五弄9号4楼. Okay, all of these subdivisions make the address a lot more complicated and a lot longer. Now that we've talked about addresses, let's talk about how to get these addresses onto envelopes. And the way to do it is different in mainland China than it is in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Let's begin with Taiwan, which has the most traditional envelopes. As you can see here, on these envelopes, everything is written vertically. The text is written vertically. This is the most traditional type of Chinese envelope. In mainland China, you tend to find this kind of envelope in museum gift shops, whereas in Taiwan, they're still being used on a day-to-day basis. Okay, when you look at one of these envelopes, you'll see that there is a red box in the middle. That is where you write the name of the recipient. So let's say we're sending a letter to Zhou Jielun, then you would write the name of the recipient, Zhou Jielun, in large characters in the middle of this box. Under the name, you would typically write a character shou or qi. Shou means to receive, meaning he's the recipient, or you could write qi, which means to open. He's the one who is meant to open the letter. So Zhou Jielun qi, in the red box in the middle. Now to the right of the red box, this is where you write the address of the recipient. At the very top, you write the zip code, and then beneath it, you write the entire address in the order of big to small. So in this case, 台北市, the city, 南京东路四段, the street, 53巷, the lane, 五弄, the alley, and then 9号4楼, the number and the floor. Okay, so to the right of the box is where you write the address of the recipient vertically. To the left of the box, this is where you write the address of the sender. Okay, so you'll see that the address of the sender is again the city, 台北市, and then the street, 重庆南路三段. Okay, and then the lane, 15巷, the alley, 13弄, and then the house number, 23号. Okay, going from big to small. And then under the address, you have the name of the sender, which in this case would be Zhang Huimei. And then under the name, you have the character ji, or jian. Ji means to send the letter. Jian means to seal the letter. And this is how things are to be placed on a vertically written traditional Chinese envelope. Now, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, people don't just use traditional envelopes that are vertical. They also use horizontally oriented Western-style envelopes. And when they do, the place where they put the sender's address and the recipient's address is pretty much the same as in Western societies. So in the upper left-hand corner is where you have the sender's address. So as you can see on this envelope over here, in the upper left-hand corner, you have the zip code, and then you have the sender's address, 台北市重庆南路3段15巷13弄23号. And then you have the name of the sender, 张惠妹, together with the character T to send after the name. Okay, so all of the same information that you have for the sender, in this case, in the Western style envelope, you would put in the upper left-hand corner. Whereas in the middle of the envelope, you would have information pertaining to the recipient. So in this case, you would have the zip code, and then you would have the address, 台北市南京东路4段53巷5弄9号4楼. And underneath that, the name of the recipient, 周杰伦, together with the character 收 to indicate that he is the recipient. Okay, so the same information that we had before in the vertical style envelope, except now it is placed on a Western style horizontally oriented envelope. Notice, however, that what is different from English is that the order of things still goes from big to small. So you begin with the city, and then the street, all the way to the house number, and then you have the name of the recipient at the very end, which is the reverse of what you would do in English. Okay, these are horizontal style envelopes in Hong Kong and Taiwan only, because in mainland China, the horizontal style envelope is used very differently. Now, this is what a horizontal style envelope would look like in mainland China. It looks deceptively similar to horizontal style envelopes in Taiwan and Hong Kong, but the order of elements are entirely different. On this mainland Chinese style horizontal envelope, in the upper left-hand corner is where you have the recipient's address. So the person that you want to send it to, the address of the person that you want to send it to appears in the upper left-hand corner. So you have the zip code, and then you have the address, 广东省广州市白云区解放路16号. That would be the recipient's address. In the middle, written in large characters, is where you have the recipient's name. So here we have the recipient Wang Yibo, together with the character Shou after it. And then in the lower right-hand corner is where you put the sender's address. So the sender's address in this case would be 上海市南京东路830号. And then the sender's name, Xiao Zhan, appears after it with the character Ji, meaning to send. And at the very bottom, you have the zip code of the sender. So with that, I hope you have a better understanding of how time and space is ordered in Chinese. This order reflects a worldview in which you zoom in from without. You start with the largest elements and eventually zoom into the smaller elements. Now, applications of this worldview include dates and times, but also addresses and envelope formats. So the next time you give somebody your address in Chinese, remember to zoom in from without, starting with the country, and then the state, and then the city, and then the street, and then the number of the house in this video. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, don't forget to like this video, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.